Peekskill, New York, September 4th, 1949, 1:47 p.m. The caravan entered Peekskill like an invading army, 23 cars in tight formation, moving slowly down the main road toward Cortlandt Manor, where Paul Robeson was scheduled to perform an outdoor concert at 3 p.m. Each car carried 4 to 5 men. Black men from Harlem, dressed in dark suits, moving with military precision, windows rolled down so their faces were visible, so everyone watching understood exactly who they were and why they'd come. In the lead car sat Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, 44 years old, Harlem's most powerful and most respected black criminal operator, the man who'd built a reputation through 4 decades of strategic thinking and disciplined violence, the man who'd earned respect from Italian mob families and fear from anyone who threatened Harlem's community. The white supremacist mob, lining both sides of the road, saw the caravan approaching and understood immediately that something had changed, that the balance of power they'd enjoyed all morning, throwing rocks at arriving black concert-goers, screaming racial slurs, attacking people with impunity while police watched and did nothing, was about to shift violently. Rocks began flying toward the lead cars. Bottles smashed against windshields. White men with baseball bats and tire irons rushed toward the caravan, screaming threats, confident in their numbers and their violence. Then the caravan stopped. Car doors opened simultaneously. 100 men emerged. Not panicked, not running, not defensive. They emerged calm and purposeful, spreading out along both sides of the road in organized formation, creating a human corridor that stretched from where they'd stopped all the way to the concert grounds half a mile ahead. Bumpy Johnson stood in front of his car, completely still, looking at the white supremacist mob with an expression that conveyed neither fear nor anger, just absolute certainty that what was about to happen would happen exactly as he'd planned it. The rocks stopped flying. The screaming quieted. The white men with weapons hesitated, suddenly understanding that they weren't facing frightened concert-goers anymore. They were facing an organized force that had come prepared for exactly this confrontation, that wanted this confrontation, that would welcome the opportunity to deliver the violence these racists had been threatening all morning. Even the police officers, dozens of them positioned along the road, who'd been standing idle while white supremacists attacked black people for hours, could feel the power that had just arrived. They could see in the body language of Johnson's men that these weren't people who could be intimidated or scattered. They could understand from the military precision of how the caravan had arrived and deployed that this was an organized operation led by someone who'd planned every detail. The white supremacist mob backed away slowly, understanding that the easy violence they'd been enjoying was over, that continuing to throw rocks or swing bats at this caravan would trigger a response they weren't prepared to handle. Bumpy Johnson looked directly at the nearest group of police officers, 5 white cops standing beside their patrol cars who'd watched white supremacists attack black people all morning without intervening, and said in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "We're here to escort Mr. Paul Robeson to his concert. We're here to protect the people who came to see him perform, and we're here to make very clear that anyone who tries to stop us, who tries to attack Mr. Robeson or the people who came to see him is going to face consequences that they're not going to enjoy. Now, you police officers have a choice. You can do your jobs and protect everyone here equally, or you can stand aside and watch what happens when you don't. Either way, we're walking to that concert grounds right now, and Mr. Robeson is going to perform, and no one is going to stop us. So, what's it going to be?" The police officers looked at each other, looked at Johnson's 100 men spread out in formation, looked at the white supremacist mob that had suddenly gone quiet and made the calculation that trying to stop this caravan would create a level of violence that they weren't prepared to handle. "Just keep the peace," one officer said weakly. "No violence from your side." Johnson smiled coldly. "We'll keep the peace as long as peace is kept. But if anyone throws one more rock, swings one more bat, screams one more threat at people who came here to enjoy a concert, we're going to respond in ways that make very clear why Harlem doesn't tolerate racism or violence against our people. Now step aside." The caravan began moving again, Johnson's 100 men walking in formation on both sides, creating a protected corridor through which cars carrying Paul Robeson and additional concert-goers could pass safely. The white, supremacist mob stood watching, impotent and humiliated, understanding that Harlem had just taught them a lesson about power, that organized discipline beats disorganized hatred, that 100 prepared men could neutralize a mob of thousands, and that Bumpy Johnson had just demonstrated why he was legendary. The story of how Bumpy Johnson came to lead 100 men into Peekskill, New York, on September 4, 1949, began 2 days earlier with a phone call that Johnson would later describe as one of the most important calls he'd ever received. The call came on Thursday, September 1, 1949, at approximately 7:30 p.m. Johnson was at his apartment on Edgecombe Avenue in Harlem, eating dinner with his wife Mamie when the phone rang. Theodore Green, the attorney who worked with both Harlem operators and civil rights organizations, was on the line, and his voice carried urgency that Johnson immediately recognized as serious. "Bumpy, I need your help with something that's bigger than business, bigger than criminal operations. This is about our community, about protecting one of our most important voices from being silenced by racist violence. Can you meet me tonight?" Johnson agreed immediately. Within 30 minutes, he was sitting in Green's office on 125th Street, learning about a situation that would require everything Johnson had learned about organizing men and deploying force strategically. Green explained, "Paul Robeson, one of the most famous black Americans in the world, a singer and actor who'd achieved international fame, an activist who spoke out forcefully against racism and colonialism, was scheduled to perform an outdoor concert in Peekskill, New York, on September 4th. The concert was a benefit for the Civil Rights Congress, an organization that fought against racial discrimination and political repression. But white supremacist groups had organized to prevent the concert from happening. Local residents had formed mobs threatening violence against anyone who attended. The Ku Klux Klan and other racist organizations were planning to physically attack Robeson and concert-goers. Police had made clear they wouldn't provide adequate protection. In fact, many local police sympathized with the white supremacists and would likely allow violence to occur. The first concert was scheduled for August 27th, Green continued. A white supremacist mob attacked people arriving for that concert, threw rocks, beat people with clubs, burned a cross, screamed racial slurs. The concert had to be canceled because the violence was too severe. Robeson never even made it to the venue. Now he's rescheduling for September 4th, and civil rights organizations are promising better security. But Bumpy, I've seen their security plans, and they're not adequate. These white supremacists are coming with thousands of people, with weapons, with the intent to seriously hurt or kill Robeson if they can get to him. The civil rights organizations have maybe 50 or 60 people willing to provide security. That's not enough against thousands of armed racists who have police support." Johnson listened carefully, understanding immediately why Green had called him. "You want me to provide security that civil rights organizations can't provide. You want me to bring enough men with enough willingness to use violence that white supremacists understand attacking Robeson or concert-goers will have serious consequences. Exactly, Green said. Paul Robeson is one of our most important voices. He's spoken out against racism when it was dangerous to do so. He's used his fame to fight for our community, and now racists are trying to silence him through violence, trying to make clear that black people who speak too loudly will be attacked. We can't let that happen, Bumpy. We can't let racists silence one of our greatest voices. And you're the only person I know who can organize the kind of security that actually protects Robeson in a situation this dangerous. Johnson sat silently for several moments, thinking through the logistics, the risks, the strategy that would be required. Finally, he said, "I'll do it. Not for money. This isn't a business operation. I'll do it because Paul Robeson represents something important, and because letting racists silence him through violence would be accepting that we can't protect our own people. I'll bring 100 men to Peekskill on September 4th. We'll provide security for Robeson from the moment he arrives until the moment he leaves safely, and we'll make very clear to those white supremacists that attacking Robeson or anyone attending his concert means facing consequences they're not prepared to handle. That's a promise." Bumpy Johnson spent the next 2 days organizing what would become one of the most impressive displays of coordinated community protection in Harlem's history. He needed 100 men willing to face potentially lethal violence from white supremacists and hostile police. He needed men who were disciplined enough to follow orders, brave enough to stand against overwhelming odds, and committed enough to the community that they'd risk their lives to protect Paul Robeson and the principle he represented. Johnson called in every favor he'd accumulated over decades of operations. He contacted men who worked in his criminal organization, enforcers, security personnel, soldiers who'd proven themselves reliable in dangerous situations. He contacted men who didn't work for him, but who respected him and understood that he was asking them to participate in something important. He contacted union members, longshoremen, construction workers, black men from Harlem who had physical courage and who understood that this was about protecting their community rather than about criminal operations. By the evening of September 3rd, Johnson had assembled commitments from 103 men, enough to provide redundancy in case some couldn't make it, enough to create the overwhelming show of force that would be necessary to deter violence from thousands of white supremacists. Johnson organized them into units of 5, with each unit having a designated leader responsible for coordination and discipline. He held a meeting on the evening of September 3rd at a warehouse in Harlem, addressing all 100 men who'd committed to the operation. "Tomorrow we're going to Peekskill to protect Paul Robeson," Johnson told the assembled men. "We're going because white supremacists tried to stop his last concert through violence, and they're planning to do it again tomorrow. We're going because Paul Robeson is one of our greatest voices, and we can't allow racists to silence him through intimidation and violence. We're going to make very clear that attacking Robeson or people who came to see him perform will trigger consequences that those racists aren't prepared to handle." Johnson continued, laying out the strategy. "We're bringing 23 cars in tight formation. We're arriving at 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes before Robeson is scheduled to arrive. We're creating a protected corridor from the road to the concert grounds, and we're maintaining that corridor throughout the concert so people can come and go safely. We're not starting violence, but if white supremacists attack us, we're responding immediately and decisively. We're showing them that Harlem protects its own, that we're organized, disciplined, and willing to fight if fighting becomes necessary." The men listened intently, understanding the seriousness of what they were undertaking. Some of them would later recall that Johnson's final words before they left that meeting captured perfectly why they were willing to risk their lives for this operation. Paul Robeson doesn't know most of us personally. He's not part of our criminal operations. He's not paying us for this protection. But he's one of us. He's a black man who's achieved greatness despite racism, who's used his voice to fight for our community, who represents what we can accomplish when we're given the opportunities we deserve. Tomorrow, white supremacists are trying to silence him, trying to make clear that black people who speak too loudly will be beaten into submission. We're going to Peekskill to prove them wrong. We're going to demonstrate that Harlem protects its heroes, that organized black men can stand against racist mobs, and that violence against our people has consequences. That's why we're doing this. Not for money, not for reputation. We're doing it because it's right. The caravan assembled in Harlem at 11 a.m. on Sunday, September 4th, 1949. 23 cars, 100 men, all dressed in dark suits that made them look like an organized army rather than a random collection of individuals. Bumpy Johnson inspected the caravan before departure, moving from car to car, checking that every unit understood its assignment, ensuring that discipline and coordination would be maintained throughout the operation. At 11:30 a.m., the caravan departed Harlem, driving north toward Peekskill. The journey took approximately 2 hours, giving Johnson time to think about what they were about to face. The situation in Peekskill was already deteriorating. Reports coming from civil rights organizers on the ground indicated that thousands of white supremacists had gathered, that they were stopping cars carrying black concertgoers and attacking passengers, that police were doing nothing to stop the violence. The Ku Klux Klan had a visible presence. Men were carrying weapons openly, baseball bats, tire irons, brass knuckles, some rumors of firearms. The atmosphere was charged with hatred and the promise of violence. Johnson understood that his 100 men would be outnumbered potentially 10-1 or more. But he also understood something that the white supremacist mob didn't understand. That organization beats numbers. That discipline beats rage. That 100 prepared men moving with coordinated purpose could dominate a situation where thousands of disorganized racists were just expressing hatred without strategic thinking. As the caravan approached Peekskill at 1:30 p.m., Johnson radioed instructions to all units. We're entering hostile territory. Stay calm. Stay disciplined. Don't respond to verbal provocations. But if anyone throws a rock, swings a weapon, physically attacks any of our people, respond immediately with overwhelming force. We're here to protect Robeson and concert-goers, and we're going to accomplish that mission regardless of what it takes. At 1:47 p.m., the caravan entered Peekskill's main road and encountered exactly what Johnson had expected: chaos, violence, and a white supremacist mob that had been attacking black concert-goers for hours, while police stood by and watched. When Bumpy Johnson's caravan stopped and 100 men emerged in organized formation, the entire dynamic of the situation changed. Instantly. The white supremacist mob had been operating with impunity all morning, attacking people who were isolated and scared, overwhelming them through numbers and violence, while police refused to intervene. But Johnson's 100 men weren't isolated or scared. They were organized, coordinated, and clearly prepared for violence if violence became necessary. The formation Johnson's men created was strategically brilliant. They formed 2 parallel lines along both sides of the road, creating a protected corridor approximately 10 feet wide that stretched half a mile from where they'd stopped to the concert grounds. Anyone walking through that corridor was protected by 50 men on each side, men who were watching for threats and prepared to respond instantly. White supremacists who'd been throwing rocks and attacking isolated concertgoers suddenly found themselves facing an organized force that was watching them specifically, that was prepared to retaliate immediately if they attacked anyone inside the protected corridor. The easy violence they'd been enjoying was over. Some white supremacists tried to maintain their aggression. A group of about 15 men approached the corridor with baseball bats, screaming racial slurs, threatening to attack. Johnson's men didn't retreat or show fear. They simply shifted positions slightly, tightening their formation, making clear they were ready for confrontation. Johnson himself walked to the front of the formation and addressed the white supremacists directly. "You can walk away right now, or you can attack us and find out what happens when you attack organized black men who came prepared for exactly this situation. Your choice, but choose fast, because we're not standing here debating all day." The white supremacists looked at Johnson, looked at his 100 men standing in disciplined formation, looked at each other, and made the calculation that attacking this force would result in violence they weren't prepared to handle. They backed away slowly, maintaining their verbal aggression but abandoning their physical threat. This confrontation was repeated multiple times over the next 30 minutes as different groups of white supremacists tested Johnson's formation, looking for weakness, trying to determine if they could break through and attack concertgoers inside the corridor. Every time, Johnson's men maintained discipline, showed no fear, made clear they were prepared for violence without initiating it, and waited for the white supremacists to make the calculation that attacking was more dangerous than backing down. Every time, the white supremacists backed down. At 2:15 p.m., Paul Robeson arrived at the concert grounds, driven through Johnson's protected corridor in a car surrounded by additional security provided by civil rights organizations and union members who'd volunteered to help. Robeson stepped out of his car and saw Johnson's 100 men maintaining formation along the road, saw the white supremacist mob that had been neutralized by their organized presence, understood immediately that Harlem had sent an army to protect him. Robeson walked over to where Johnson stood, coordinating the security operation. They'd never met before. Johnson operated in criminal circles, while Robeson operated in entertainment and activism. But both men understood who the other was and what this moment represented. "Mr. Johnson," Robeson said, extending his hand, "Theodore Green told me you were organizing security. I didn't fully understand what that meant until I saw your men creating that corridor through a mob of thousands. Thank you. Thank you for protecting me and everyone who came here today despite the violence and hatred." Johnson shook Robeson's hand firmly. "Mr. Robeson, you've been fighting for our community for years, using your voice when using it was dangerous. Today it's our turn to fight for you. Go perform your concert. We'll maintain this corridor throughout, and we'll escort you safely out of here when you're finished. Nobody's going to touch you or anyone here today. That's a promise." The concert began at 3:00 p.m. Approximately 20,000 people attended, far more than had been expected, partly because news of the violence at the canceled August 27th concert had generated publicity and determination among civil rights supporters to attend the rescheduled concert as an act of defiance against racism. Johnson's men maintained their formation throughout the 3-hour concert, standing in the hot September sun, watching the white supremacist mob that remained nearby but that no longer dared to attack people moving through the protected corridor. At one point during the concert, a group of approximately 30 white supremacists attempted to breach the corridor from the side, rushing toward concertgoers with weapons. Johnson's men responded instantly. The nearest unit of 5 men intercepted the attackers, engaging in hand-to-hand combat that lasted approximately 2 minutes before the white supremacists retreated, several of them injured, understanding that Johnson's men weren't just providing symbolic protection, they were willing and able to fight. Police officers who'd been standing idle all day finally intervened after this confrontation, not to arrest the white supremacists who'd attacked, but to create a greater separation between the mob and Johnson's corridor, understanding that additional violence would be blamed on their failure to maintain order. The concert ended at 6 p.m. Paul Robeson performed for 3 hours, singing spirituals and folk songs, speaking about civil rights and human dignity, demonstrating exactly why white supremacists wanted to silence him, because his voice was powerful, inspiring, dangerous to people who wanted to maintain racial hierarchy. As concertgoers began leaving, Johnson's men maintained their corridor, allowing people to reach their cars safely, while white supremacists watched from a distance, impotent and frustrated that they'd been unable to deliver the violence they'd promised. At 6:30 p.m., Robeson was escorted back through the corridor to his car. Johnson accompanied him personally, walking beside the vehicle as it moved slowly through the protected corridor toward the main road where Robeson would depart Peekskill. Before Robeson's car pulled away, he rolled down the window and said to Johnson, "What you did today, organizing this security, bringing these men, standing against that mob, this is as important as anything I could accomplish through singing or speaking. You've shown that our community protects its own, that organized black men can stand against racist violence, that we don't have to accept intimidation and hatred. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. History will remember what you did here today." Johnson responded simply, "History can remember or forget. That's not why we came. We came because it was right, because you deserved protection that you weren't getting from authorities who should have provided it. Now go safely, Mr. Robeson. Keep using your voice. We'll keep protecting our community." Robeson's car departed without incident. Johnson's caravan maintained position for another hour, ensuring that all concert-goers who wanted to leave could do so safely through the protected corridor. At 7:45 p.m., with the concert grounds empty and all attendees departed, Johnson gave the order for his men to pack up and return to Harlem. They'd been standing in formation for 6 hours, had engaged in several confrontations with white supremacists, had maintained discipline and coordination throughout, despite heat, fatigue, and constant tension. The caravan returned to Harlem at approximately 10 p.m. As they drove through Harlem's streets, residents who'd heard about what happened in Peekskill came out to cheer, to applaud, to celebrate that their community had successfully protected Paul Robeson and had demonstrated that organized black men could stand against racist mobs. The Peekskill riots, as the events of August 27th and September 4th, 1949 became known, were extensively covered by newspapers nationally and internationally. The violence, the racism, the police complicity, all of it was documented and publicized. But within Harlem specifically, what people remembered most wasn't the white supremacist violence. What they remembered was Bumpy Johnson bringing 100 men to Peekskill, creating a protected corridor through a hostile mob, standing against thousands of racists who'd been terrorizing black concertgoers and successfully protecting Paul Robeson and ensuring his concert happened despite everything white supremacists had tried to do to stop it. The operation became legendary in Harlem as an example of community protection at its finest. When legal authorities failed to protect black citizens, when police stood by while racists attacked, Harlem organized its own protection and delivered it effectively through discipline, coordination, and willingness to fight when fighting became necessary. Paul Robeson himself spoke about the Peekskill experience many times in subsequent years, always crediting the union members and community volunteers who provided security, understanding that publicly identifying Bumpy Johnson's role might create legal problems, but privately expressing gratitude for Johnson's protection. Theodore Green, the attorney who'd connected Johnson with the security request, later said, "What Bumpy did in Peekskill demonstrated something that people often forget about him. Yes, he was a criminal who ran illegal operations, but he was also a community protector who understood that certain principles transcended business considerations. Paul Robeson needed protection that legal authorities refused to provide, and Bumpy provided it because it was right, because Robeson represented values and achievements that deserved protection. That operation, bringing 100 men, maintaining discipline for 6 hours under extreme pressure, successfully protecting Robeson and thousands of concertgoers, that was Bumpy at his finest." The day Bumpy Johnson brought 100 men to Peekskill to protect Paul Robeson became one of the most celebrated events in Johnson's legendary career, not because it was violent, though it could have been, not because it generated profit, it didn't, but because it demonstrated perfectly what community protection meant when that community was Black Americans facing racist violence in 1949 America. Legal authorities couldn't be trusted to protect Black citizens equally. Police in Peekskill and many other places sympathized with white supremacists and allowed violence against Black people to occur without intervention. The legal system that was supposed to protect everyone actually protected only white people while allowing Black people to be terrorized. In that context, Bumpy Johnson's decision to organize 100 men and personally lead them into a hostile situation where they were outnumbered by thousands represented something profound. The principle that communities protect their own when legal protection fails, that organized discipline beats disorganized hatred, that standing against racism sometimes requires willingness to fight rather than just willingness to speak. Johnson never sought publicity for the Peekskill operation. He never tried to profit from it or use it to enhance his criminal reputation. He did it because it was right, because Paul Robeson deserved protection, because letting racists silence one of Black America's greatest voices through violence would have been accepting powerlessness. That's the legacy of September 4th, 1949. Not just that Bumpy Johnson protected Paul Robeson, but that he demonstrated what organized Black community power could accomplish when it was applied strategically and courageously in defense of principles that transcended individual self-interest. Somewhere in that protected corridor, somewhere in the formation of 100 men who stood for 6 hours against thousands of white supremacists, somewhere in Johnson's calm certainty that his mission would succeed, somewhere in all of that was the essence of what made Bumpy Johnson legendary. Not just the criminal who ran Harlem's illegal operations, but the community protector who understood that certain values, dignity, respect, protection of the vulnerable, mattered more than profit or safety or any other consideration. That was September 4th, 1949. That was the day Bumpy Johnson brought 100 men to war and won without firing a shot. That was the day Harlem saved Paul Robeson and proved that organized community power could stand against hatred and win.